It's so nice to have all of you here today. The program is to get a better understanding of the undergrounding system and the undergrounding project that is currently underway in Palm Beach. And the way we thought we would do that is we would invite three panelists, perhaps the three local people who understand the most about undergrounding in our community, to come and speak with us, each for just maybe 8 minutes or so, and then to open it up for your questions. The plan is that our town manager, Tom Bradford, will begin with a little overview, a little history, try and set the context. Then the chairman of the task force, Jeff Smith, will get up and talk about the actual project itself and what that involves. And then finally, we'll ask the Public Works Director, Paul Brazil, to say a few words about the nuts and bolts, how actually the project will be implemented. That's our plan for the day, and so I'm going to ask Mr. Bradford to come and join us up front.
Good morning, everybody. As you're going to soon see here, if I can get my act together, this is not our first time around the block relative to undergrounding. The subject matter of undergrounding actually began in the year 2003 when Mayor Leslie Smith asked the town staff to look into the feasibility of undergrounding. And that assignment fell to me. At the time, I was the deputy town manager. So this morning, what you're going to hear from us is a little bit of history. You're going to hear about our neighborhood initiatives that we've had going on for many years, the project benefits, the costs and the method of payment, the safeguards, the upcoming referendum, the design implementation, construction plan, and then, of course, your questions that we will attempt to answer. And then Ned already introduced to you the people that will be with me today on the panel. The town has assembled an impressive team to help work on this project. On the Underground Utilities Task Force, which you just heard mentioned when Jeff Smith was introduced, is very impressive. Jeffrey, as you know, is a renowned architect with a keen eye for aesthetics and design. Wilbur Ross is into many, many things, but mostly financial. Dennis Boderoff is a banker in Nashville, Tennessee, and he also was previously on the board of the Tennessee Valley Authority, the largest wholesale electrical utility in the United States. Tony Dow has lived here many, many years, and he was a financial advisor for many years. Mrs. Susan Geary worked for, I believe, over 20 years for AECOM, one of the largest, if not the largest, engineering and architectural firms in the United States. And Donald Gabranson, he is a graduate of Cornell University, and he has a number of chemical plants throughout the world in North America and in India. And then finally we have Thomas Parker, who I believe is perhaps a lifelong resident, and he too has been in financial matters and investment in his career. In addition to the task force, which was created by the town council, we've created and have the following work groups and or consultants working for us. We have an internal working group consisting of the deputy town manager, the director of public works, the special projects coordinator for engineering in our office, as well as myself and Jane Struder, the director of finance. We've hired Cornerstone Solutions to be our public information provider for this project. We have hired Raftellus Financial Consultants of Pasadena, California, because one of their primary engineers and financial analysts was the original creator of the town's assessment program, and we wanted to keep him on board to help us with that. We've also utilized PFM consultants out of Orlando relative to financial matters, and of course our bond counsel is Rick Miller, who is a town resident and bond counsel for the town of Palm Beach. Like I said earlier, this isn't our first time around the block. Mayor Leslie Smith initiated it in 2003. We created and completed our first report on the subject matter, showing, amongst many other things, the ways and means that are available in Florida to pay for undergrounding. You might ask yourself, well, why do we have to pay for it? Why don't the utility companies pay for it? Well, that's not the way it works in Florida, is the simple answer. There are tariffs that have been created in Florida for undergrounding, whereby the requestor of the undergrounding must pay the cost differential to do that, and I will explain that a little later. Like I said, the staff report was completed in February 2004. I think the town council realized it was a very complicated and expensive project, and they sort of put it on the back burner. And then in the fall and the late summer of that same year, the hurricanes hit. And we had residents in the north end of town who were without electrical and other utility services for 3 or more weeks. And they demanded that something be done about it, and suddenly it went from the back burner to the front burner. And the council realized that this required more resources than just the town of Palm Beach could come up with. We needed to, in order to effect change in Tallahassee relative to the tariffs I mentioned earlier, we had to solicit the help of other local governments throughout the state of Florida. The town council created the Municipal Underground Utilities Consortium of over 60 cities, including the town of Palm Beach, in the state of Florida, and we as a group funded over a $500,000 effort to cause the Florida Public Service Commission to grant, amongst other things, a 25% discount if large-scale, local government-controlled underground projects took place. So what's important to know about all of that is that we will get a 25% discount if we do the entire town or sections of town not less than 3 pole miles of overhead utility lines. So that one is that. As I said, the underground, Public Service Commission made those changes. We also initiated a right-of-way agreement with Florida Power and Light, which allowed us to use right-of-way because, as you know, many of the streets in Palm Beach are quite narrow, and in some cases you need to use right-of-way in order to accommodate an underground utility program and to avoid widespread tearing up and restoration of people's front yards. So we now have that capability, which gives us much more flexibility in doing what we need to with undergrounding. The Public Service Commission also adopted a storm secure plan. If you look at your power bill very closely, you'll see a little charge on there for about a couple of dollars a month. That goes statewide for FPL service area to convert all of, well, not all of, but the critical facilities of their overhead system to make it hardened. Hardened means it can withstand winds of 145 to 150 miles an hour. And in order to accommodate that, you get larger, taller concrete poles. And we may have pictures here. You'll see, this is a picture of Juno Beach. It may be hard for you to see, but on the the left side of the photograph is a hardened pole, and you can see just below it, I think, to the immediate right is a regular concrete pole, and then there's another pole on the other side. You can see that the hardened pole can't even be entirely within the frame, in the front picture frame. And so that's an important piece of why are we doing this now, because FPL came to us in October of 2014 and said, we have a plan to harden the facilities in the town of Palm Beach. Long story short, the town council realized that doing this in large portions of the town was not going to be acceptable to the town residents because it was aesthetically unacceptable. And so it's either we underground or we have this hardened facility program. And the town council does not feel that the majority of town residents are going to be at all satisfied with the hardened facilities. So that is that. The status of situation. FPL is mandated, as I said, to harden the trunk lines townwide. Undergrounding is proposed by us instead of hardening. And we've been doing local neighborhoods for a number of years because the last time we visited this subject, the outcome was that the town council decided that we would set up a situation with special non-ad valorem assessments and let each neighborhood that was interested through petition let the town know they wanted it, and we proceeded to do that. So far, we've converted all of Everglades Island to underground utilities via Fontana and lake towers in the 300 block of Dunbar on the south side, as well as Nightingale Trail and La Puerta Way are on the to-do list regardless of what we do town-wide with undergrounding. So that's a quick overview of how we got here today. And next, I'm going to let Jeff Smith come up here and tell you a lot of the details about costs, and of course, ultimately, we will answer all of your questions. So Jeff, if you'd come on up, it's your turn. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Well, to start with, as chair of the Underground Utility Task Force, we are advisory to the town council. We basically just make recommendations. They get sent to the town council, and the town council makes the final decision. I have a great group of people on the Underground Utilities Task Force with a wide range of experience, and everyone is committed to the project and is very excited about it. First and foremost, I believe, is the aesthetics that the underground utilities will accomplish in town. I think we all know how frustrating it is when our power goes out in the middle of the night because there's a bit of a windstorm, and then Asplund comes in and rips all your landscaping to shreds, and the place looks terrible for another 6 months. And so by burying the lines, it should eliminate all of those crazy outages that happen in the middle of the night. So as Tom said, we really don't have a choice of keeping the status quo of what the power lines look like in town today. They're going to be hardened, they're going to be taller, bigger, uglier, and this is just the only solution we can come up with is underground. We'll be undergrounding all the utilities. We'll be undergrounding telephone, cable, future fiber optics, and the power. The roads will also basically we'll be ripping up the roads so much in town. We'll be going with underground boring, and they make up. I don't know if you all saw it this summer when the gas company came in and was replacing the lines, but they would do directional boring about every 100 feet or so and create just a little hole of about 1.5 by 1.5 feet and directional bore to the next, and bringing all this service to our houses. I think they did a great job, and I think they did it very quickly and neatly, and then they repaved the roads, and that's what we will see happening with the underground utilities. Reliability. FP&L actually would prefer having the power lines overhead because it's faster to repair them, and they can see where the problem is. But and they're reluctant to tell you how much more reliable your electricity is if it's buried underground. But I think we all know that as a fact. There are other communities that have already done this, and they were very impressed with the reliability issue. And then finally, the only overhead lines that feed the town will be from West Palm, and those lines are required to be hardened by the Public Safety Commission. And then with the lines buried underground, it should greatly improve our safety as far as lines that could drop in a storm and for public safety reasons. Okay, cost and method of payment. The cost of the project is not to exceed $90 million. And the way we are going to pay for that is general obligation bonds with a special tax assessment. The basic cost per property, there's 9,500 properties in the town, and the average cost would be $550 per parcel over a 30-year period. Now, the way that it's going to be assessed is based on an equivalent benefit unit. That's each property is based on the size of the property and the size of the building that sits on the property, and then the benefit to the property, whether it already has undergrounding or whether it doesn't, whether it has a pole in the yard. And then it'll be based on aesthetics, safety, and reliability. Okay. By getting the lowest tax rate and doing a general obligation bond, it is required that this goes to a referendum to the town voters, okay? And we need 50% of the vote to make it, to make this happen. And then the current rate of interest is now 3.81, but as we know, that could change any time. It hasn't changed in the last 10 years, but we can't count on that. Okay, safeguards. The town council has appointed the Underground Utilities Task Force is actually an oversight committee for this entire project. So the project's estimated to take about 10 years to do, and the Underground Utilities Task Force will be that sounding board for any resident that has an issue or has any questions and would like to come and any grievance or anything like that. The next issue is public education and workshops. We plan on having several workshops for such as this, so that residents can come and ask questions of how it's going to affect them personally. And we also will be asking for a request for quotations from consulting teams. And so the referendum, election day will be Tuesday, March 15th, 2016. There will be absent ballots available by January 29th for the military and anyone overseas. And on February 16th, domestic ballots will be available. Early voting will begin on Saturday, March 5th, and extend to Saturday, March 12th. And there'll be 13 locations countywide to vote. It's also going to be the primary for the presidential election, so we think there'll be a really large voter turnout, and we hope that everybody in the room turns out and votes yes. Okay. Afterwards, we'll. And here's other cities that have actually done and gone ahead and done their own undergrounding. Jupiter Island has done it, Jupiter Inlet Colony, Gulfstream, Golden Beach, Sunny Isles, Winter Park, and Longboat Key. We did have presentations to the Underground Task Force from these communities, and they came and gave us all their pros and cons of what happened and, what to do and what not to do. And, but again, they were a very impressive group of people that took on this task, and they accomplished it, and they were extremely glad that they went through the process. So, Paul?
Good morning. I'm Paul Brazil. I'm the Director of Public Works. The question I'm going to answer is, how are we going to build this? Well, it's going to be a challenge. I don't want to say it's going to be difficult, but it's going to be a challenge. It's several years worth of construction. We need to put together a really good team to do this. The first team member that we need is going to be our design consultant. It's got to be a consultant that has done this successfully before in other places, has good experience doing this, and more than just good engineering. We need good history of community outreach, of working with the residents. To implement this and minimize the impact is going to be a real challenge. We need another challenge is going to be easements. We're going to need easements on several properties on any given street for the transformers, cable boxes, etc. So we need a firm who's used to doing all of that and has done it successfully. This consultant is also going to be instrumental in helping us pick a contractor. We've talked at the task force about some contracting alternatives. We're going to rely on this consultant to help us through that process as well. Okay, when we get to construction, how do we build this? So let's start with, what are we building? What we've got to do is get a series of conduits underneath the road. Right now, the utilities are all overhead, typically in the backyard. We want to move them to out in front of the properties in the roadway. Directional bore is a method of, you drill the conduit, you drill a hole, The drill comes out the other side, and you grab a hold of the conduit and you pull it back in. It really minimizes the impact to the roadway. There is another alternative, which is open trenching. Very disruptive, and will minimize that as much as possible. Again, we're going to be taking the utilities from overhead and putting them out in the road underground. When we do that, if there are no other utilities in the easement, we'll be able to abandon those easements in the rear yard, which will be truly advantageous for the property owners. Restoration, construction in phases. Let me talk about phasing. We're going to need to start, we're going to have multiple crews. Right now, the plan is to start at the very north end of the island and the very south end of the island, and there's a reason for it. That's where the service is coming in. So we've got a preliminary design on the north end already, and the south end work is going to be really straightforward. South of Sloan's is DOT right-of-way. It's a wide right-of-way, and it's going to be relatively easy construction. So we'll start there the first year. Then, while that construction's underway, we've got to start designing the second phase. Second phase will be an extension of the first year's construction, and at some point we're going to have to attack Midtown. We can't have multiple construction crews adjacent to each other. We saw that this summer with FPU. The town had a project on Royal Point Siena. Florida Public Utilities was working between Royal Point Siena and Wells, and the city had a Wells Road, a water line job going on. All of that construction ran into each other and traffic failed. It is very, very important that we never let these crews get too close to each other. So when we're doing first year north and south, second year probably Midtown, and the two crews are coming closer to the Midtown area, we'll have to split, and at some point we'll probably have 3 to 4 crews on the island. But we need to keep them away from each other or we're going to have some serious traffic impacts. That's very, very preliminary. We've got 6 to 10 years worth of construction. The goal is 6 years, which is very aggressive. 10 years is a reasonable schedule, minimizing impacts but balancing time and cost versus overall impact to any given neighborhood. So there's a few real big challenges ahead of us, but I'm sure that we're going to be able to do this. Town's established a website and established a phone number to call in with questions. And that's the end of this presentation, and open it up to questions.
Thank you very much. All right, we're right on time. Thank you all for making good, brief presentations. Let's do it this way. We have 2 microphones, handheld, and let's ask Karen, will you take one side, and Susie, will you take the other? And then we'll alternate questions one side to the other. And let me ask Jeff if you would come and stand at the podium, and then if you get a question you want to farm it out to Tom or Paul, then you do that, okay? Thanks. Let's take the first question over here.
At my house, the electric is coming from the alley behind it. So if you're moving the underground lines to the front of the house, my connection and meter is at the back. How are we going to, are you going to have to cut through my whole property to bring that back connection to the front?
I would say, I believe you're on Gulfstream, right?
Gulfview.
Gulfview.
Right.
And there's an alley back there.
Correct.
So I can't answer this for sure, but I would think they would, the alley is private, right,
Yes.
Tom?
Yes.
They would have to get an easement for the alley, or they'd have to move it to the front and then directional bore underneath on the side of your house to connect.
So they'll have to trench from the back to the
Not
front?
trench, they'll do a directional bore. I mean, it'll be under, I mean,
Oh.
you can actually bore underneath a swimming pool.
Really?
Yes, so these are, I mean, it's amazing what they can do.
Okay, thank you.
The issue when referendum comes up,
Pardon me?
the issue that I'm going to bring it up to everybody's attention to vote for it is high-power electric line is suspected to cause leukemia and blood cancer. If they bring the wire, which is 120 volts, the heat will melt the wire. So they changed it to more than 1,000 volts with the high cables, big cables that generate electromagnetic forces around it that generate is suspected cause leukemia, blood cancer, and melanoma. So I believe we better pay for it rather than our children and grandchildren develop that condition. Thank you.
Thank you. Never heard that one before. Yeah.
It's debatable across the world relative to the causes of electromagnetic fields and the impact to health. But it is also well known, and I think that's where you're going with it, that the electromagnetic effect, if any, is lessened by burying the power lines. But it's still debatable. Power company will never admit that that's happening, but everyone admits if you bury it, the effect is lessened.
I think, okay.
I have underground utilities on my property, and they were put in my back building in 1960, and they go underground to the pole. And about 3 or 4 years ago, I had a leak in the line that went from the pole to my house, and the electricians and the utility company had a hard time diagnosing it. Every once in a while, they saw sparks fly adjacent to the pole, and also sparks fly adjacent to my house. And it was intermittent, and it didn't occur all the time, so it was hard. All I know is I had power inside my studio, but I had difficulty in diagnosing it. Finally, the electric company came out, strung a new line, and they were above ground, just temporary, and they determined that there was a pinhole leak in the underground line, and the underground conduit had water in it. So, I would love to have underground utilities throughout the property, but my concern is that all these pipes, the joints, everything has to be hermetic, and leaks are going to cause problems in the insulation over time. And I wonder if there's anyone that has any experience other than me on this factor.
Paul, you want to respond to that?
One very advantageous part of this is we're going to end up with a brand new system. The system that was just described was many years old. The conduit is going to be continuous. The only joints are going to be in the manholes themselves. So the reliability of what we're about to construct is going to be much greater than an older underground system or the existing overhead system.
Paul, while you're up there, would you just take a minute and talk about these switch cabinets and the transformers and
Sure.
who has them and how, what that
In a typical residential neighborhood, say North End, any East-West Street, it's going to take about one transformer per 4 households. So I'm going to need an easement from about one out of every 4 people. The transformers are about how big, Tom?
3 by 4.
3 by 4, and you've seen them in communities. You can drive on Everglade Island. It's a great example. That was recently undergrounded. Periodically, you need a switch cabinet. The switch cabinets are much larger, and they need to sit above ground as well. We're going to look at trying to site those in a public easement. Typically, a switch cabinet is going to be more than somebody would want to bear on their property. It is substantially larger. It's very obvious. So we're going to try to find areas where town property, town road right-of-way, someplace out of the way for those larger obstacles. But they do need to be above ground.
They're actually coming around with a microphone, so if you just raise your hand. Who's got the microphone?
How many of those switch, the big ones, do they need per street? Curious, sorry.
We don't know yet, but it is not one per street. One. Oh, I'm sorry. How many switch cabinets per street? One switch cabinet is going to serve several streets, many streets. So it really depends upon the demand in that neighborhood with how frequently you need those. but they're much more rare than the transformers. Transformers are going to be the real challenge, getting all those easements.
Could you share with us the input that you got from the other communities? Let's say the 3 biggest cons, the 3 biggest pros from those other communities that had buried their utilities?
The cons, pros and cons from the other communities.
Well, the pros were, I have a direct quote from the mayor of Jupiter Inlet Colony I looked at this morning. He said that they've had only, since they buried their lines completely and finished in the year 2012, and since that time they've had 1 outage, and it lasted a total of 7 seconds. So they're extremely pleased in Jupiter Inlet Colony. The cons are, I think there was a general message that we got that you have to make sure that you have a significant outreach program to the citizens to make sure that they fully understand exactly the nature of what's going to happen, that you have a broad-based communications platform where people through all kinds of mediums are able to both communicate to you and for you to respond, to make sure that everybody has a way to communicate both town to the citizens and citizens to the town. Some of them made assumptions that everybody fully understood what it was about since they had a number of meetings like we've been having, but that's not the case. We have to reach out and make sure that everybody knows and then let you provide us feedback along the way.
Excuse me, once the referendum is passed, what are the plans to begin? When the date?
Are you talking about the construction or design?
The construction?
Probably about 9 months.
Yeah, it would. We estimate that the design will take 9 to 12 months to do. So if the referendum passes in March of 2016, we would be looking at construction to commence around May of 2017.
They're coming around with these microphones.
Jeff, can you comment, there was a bullet on one of the slides about an initiative with Nightingale and La Puerta, which I'm not aware of, and I live on Nightingale. So is that something that's firm or just something that's being considered, or what's going on with that?
No, it's firm. It's going to be done. It's in the works.
And how is that one getting paid for?
That's also by assessments. If you live on the north side, or you live on the north side of Nightingale,
Yes.
okay, then you're not in that program. It's the south side of Nightingale, the north side of
All right, I feel better about not knowing about it.
So that's why you don't know about it. So it doesn't affect you.
Question. This question is directed really at the town council in the hopefully, God forbid, event that the bond referendum is turned down. Do we have a plan B for financing this, since it seems that we're already committed to this project?
It's a good question.
Well, you've asked a political question, which Mike might want to, Mr. Pasillo may want to answer it, but I think it's one of those things where you cross that bridge when you come to it, because you don't know. It's a risky proposition what you're thinking.
Well, I will say that in the test areas they've already done it. They've had an 80% response of positive to go ahead and do the undergrounding.
I was hoping not to have to get up and comment on it. I thought Jeff was doing such a good job. The answer to your question, I think, is if the referendum is voted down, particularly by a decisive amount, you're probably not going to see any undergrounding. I think there's a twofold reason for doing a referendum. One is you have to legally do it if you're going to commit the taxpayers to a general obligation bond. That's a legal requirement. But I think there's also a sense of what the community wants. And if the community doesn't want this, if you'd rather have these cement poles that Tom showed you, then that's what we'll have. That's democracy in action, and if that's really what people would rather have, then that's what we'll end up with. So I think if it does get voted down, I think what you'll see is what we've seen for the last 10 years, And that's these isolated little projects around town where one particular group gets together on their street, or the dead-end street, for example, like the south side of Dunbar, the 300 block in Lake Towers, and does it privately, probably through the same assessment methodology we've been using for the last 10 years. But I think if this gets voted down, I think it's going to be a long time before we come back with undergrounding throughout the town.
The important thing to know is that if FP&L will only give this discount of 25% if they do at least a 3-mile line area. If they're doing little sections, you're not going to even get that discount. So I think it's important that we do vote yes for this.
Jeff, in
Hey, Mike.
following up the question about pros and cons from other communities, was anything said about enhanced property values in those communities? I know it's hard to sort that out, but
Everyone says they believe there is enhanced property value. There's no question about it. But how do you tabulate it? Yes.
You have complete control of the lines on the island. How about the ones? You have complete control on the lines on the island, but how about the ones that connect off island? You've got to go somewhere.
Right. The ones that connect off island are required to be hardened all the way to the substation. Okay, so they will be the big, taller poles that withstand 145 to 150 miles an hour.
That's correct. Jeff,
Craig.
just a few questions. One, you mentioned this 25% discount.
Yes.
Am I on here? Yeah, I guess. Is that, is our 95 million the net number with that discount?
Yes.
Okay. Secondly, the cost of this project, is it a 100% Palm Beach resident cost? I mean, are there any federal funds or state funds or anything available?
We haven't found any, no.
Okay. And then just lastly, could somebody revisit the discussion of how you're going to allocate costs? I must admit, I personally thought that where we would end up would just be this would be a special assessment mill rate that would go against our assessed values. But I think it was Paul that was talking about it. Maybe it was somebody else. But we've got parcels, but are all parcels on the island the same? And then there was something that if you're already underground, maybe you're not part of this project. So can you speak to that a little bit more fully?
Do you want to get more detailed than,
The assessment's based on the concept of equivalent benefit units. There's 3 categories of equivalent benefit units: aesthetics, safety, and reliability. Each property has been analyzed in the town of Palm Beach, and we have a spreadsheet for all 9,521 parcels. Generally speaking, this assessment is not based upon the value of your property. And so it is equal in the sense, or non-discriminatory in the sense, if you have a similar sized property, land-wise, similar sized structure on that property, no matter where it's located on the island, you will pay the same. Generally speaking, the larger the lot or the parcel, and in some instances, the larger the structure, the primary structure on the parcel, the more you pay. I have a number here just to share with you based on the current methodology, which we're going to update and look closer at before we obviously get to the referendum. The average assessment in the town of Palm Beach per year for 30 years is $533.56. That's the average assessment per property per year.
That includes the interest cost.
That's interest.
Straight-out calculation would be $10,000 if you take 9,000 properties together.
It's about 15,000 if you
Your number works out to be
It's about a $5 million.
So just one last question. You mentioned the 3 dynamics: aesthetics, safety, and what was the third?
reliability.
This project is a long-term project. Someone mentioned fiber optics, cable, I presume telephone. Also, one has to consider the capacity of the electrical lines to ensure adequate coverage all future use. So has all of these things will be done simultaneously and prepared for the next 30 years.
That is the plan. That's why fiber optics, the telephone company is not ready to commit to that yet, but we're suggesting putting in an empty conduit for the future of fiber optics.
But you're not actually doing fiber optics? Why isn't the island fiber optic?
Well, the telephone company explained it this way, that so many people on the island have old equipment. Basically, if you have a phone system in your house and it's run on copper, it won't work on fiber optics. So they don't want to strap people into replacing all their expensive equipment based on a technology that's not really here yet.
Odd question, but
My question is related to easements. For example, behind our property, we have the classic utility easement of FPL, the cable company, West Palm Beach, et cetera, et cetera. When these easements are abandoned physically, can we reclaim that property? You know, what's the process there as far as if we want to do some work on that? For example, when we had to put a fence in, it took probably 6 months to get clearance to do that from all the interested companies. So will our deeds be clear of that sometime in the future?
What it takes is you need to, you need to actually abandon the easement. So anybody who was granted the easement, any utility, could be the town, FP&L, any possible utility, who has right to that easement needs to abandon it. So there will be a formal process to abandon them, but it is your property now. What you're doing is no longer granting the easement across your property.
How will that actually happen? Will that automatically, or do we have to do something as the property owner to initiate the fact that, I believe there was 5 utilities involved, as I recall. Do we have to do something, or will that just automatically happen?
I would suggest that it be part of the project, that the project reaches out to those utility companies once we've relocated them and ask that they abandon their rights to that.
So I just want to be sure.
That I would suggest,
So the town will do that?
I would suggest that it would be a town function, part of the project.
I would too. I think I like that.
I'd want to caution you, though, that we're talking about 3 utilities. There could be more than that in a particular easement. There could be a sewer line, there could be a gas line, but the majority of the typical North End residents, for example, just has the 3.
Yes, I'm a resident of Everglades Island.
Yes.
Where we installed the undergrounding a couple of years ago. I would just make a couple of comments. One, the project did take much longer than was anticipated, and maybe that was a learning experience. Second, the street is much more attractive than it was previously, and certainly compared to if we were going to go to hardened poles. So I would really support the project from that point of view. However, we have had no improvement at all in power outages. Over the past year, we have probably had a dozen power outages. Our generator is continually clicking on. As recently as last week we were out, and as recently a half an hour before I came over here this morning.
Wow.
And what I'd like to understand is, if it's a 5 to 10 year project, when do the people who are installed in the early stages actually get any benefit from this? In terms of when does a grid actually become operative such that the people whose street has been done and they've put up with all the construction get the benefits of it in terms of a reduction in power outages?
FP&L has 11 subaqueous crossings to the island. Those subaqueous crossings are fed overhead back to a substation. The grid on the island is linked. So if there's an outage in one place, it can be serviced from another. The reliability benefit is going to be seen area by area once the area is completely underground. Everglade Island right now is still fed overhead. So there's a subaqueous crossing in the Midtown area. It comes up, feeds everything overhead, and then goes back down to Everglade Island. Anything overhead right now is vulnerable. That's the reliability issue that Everglade Island is seeing. So once we get an entire area underground, and FP&L has done what they've obligated to, which is harden everything from the subaqueous crossing back to the substation, then we're going to start to see a distinct improvement in reliability.
That's something real quick. Mr. McIver, this may have happened while you were out of town this summer, but we had a bad situation this summer that was affecting Everglades Island. Long story short, it was overgrowth. Branches were hitting the lines in areas far, far away from Everglades Island, even some in West Palm Beach, in the areas that are anticipated to be hardened. So you're not really receiving 100% of the benefit yet, but if we do this town-wide thing, your reliability should go greatly much higher.
How many years might that take?
Oh, well, it will occur incrementally as we march up and down the island. So it won't be overnight, but it'll eventually happen to be.
Come from the north and the south, you get to Midtown, but it's 4 or 5 years.
That's true. That's true. And the another thing to remember is those places such as Everglades Island that have already paid for and you don't get charged twice. You will be left out of the assessment program because you've already paid. But it will take a while for you to get the full benefit of reliability.
I have a question regarding the charges. I have a property on South Ocean Boulevard. I'm two properties north of Via Fontana. Via Fontana requested through a law firm locally to have the wires buried so that they could sell the house. I was written to by that law firm, and I was advised that the cost to do this, if we did it for 3 properties, mine being the third, that the cost would be between $15,000 and $20,000. We agreed, we accepted it. The final bill came in at $75,000 for us. So the 550 or 533 per property, and we don't have a very large property, it does not make sense to me given where we are today. We're paying an assessment today of just under $7,000 a year because we joined that 3 property. And it just happened because of these equivalent benefit units that my property was the larger one. And while I came in, I thought I wanted it, but I came in as a courtesy, I ended up getting charged over 50% of the 3 lots. So there are a lot of things here that don't make a lot of sense to me. I don't understand if we are going to have to pay again for the rest of the island because we've already done it.
Let me respond to this one because Via Fontana was probably the most expensive underground project we've ever done in the town, and the way it worked out did result in very substantial costs, much higher than anticipated. Part of the problem is when you underground for three houses, that's what you're going to get. It varies significantly when you do it by community. For example, Lake Towers. The Lake Towers will take care of 66 units in the Lake Towers condominium and 5 properties on the south side of Dunbar Road on the 300 block. That average cost, because of where it is, will be substantially lower than what the $550 per year that I think Jeff quoted. I think that number, Tom, is somewhere around, what is it, $180 or something per unit? It's about $3,000 per condominium spread out over 30 years, which is $100 a year, plus the interest comes out to about $180. So it really depends on where you are. And frankly, the Via Fontana example is, I think, a good reason why you want to do this on a town-wide basis, because if you do little pockets, it's going to be $180 here, and it's going to be $40,000 here, and it really depends on where you are in the town.
But sure. I just wanted to say you will not be charged twice. Okay. Okay. Well, the truth is we don't, but we have a 20% contingency to anticipate overages. Via Fontana was the first job the town did. It was not the town of Palm Beach that told you what the cost would be. It was a law firm that we had nothing to do with, but I understand how you feel the way you do, but it wasn't us that gave you that number. We are the ones that are charging you, but we're not the ones that told you it would be a lower number.
But also the bond is over 90 million, that's
Yeah.
it, that's all there is.
Yes, and then, of course, that's a bond issue this go-around.
So will all the utility poles be coming down as the project moves along, including the existing hardened infrastructure that is already on the island?
All the poles will be coming down, that's the goal. And I don't think there's anything hardened yet, is there?
There's no hardens really on the island, but
No.
all of them will be coming down.
Well, there's cement poles along North Lake Way. Yeah.
But those still won't meet the code as far as the wind loading. So those would come down and taller and bigger ones would be replacing them.
But they'll come down as part
Yes.
of this project. And then what will happen to the lighting that exists on those poles currently?
We're going to put new lighting standards in that match the other decorative ones in the town. Who-
Good morning. I live on High Mount Road, and when Gottfried built his big house up there about 15 or so years ago, he undergrounded all the utilities on the west side of the street. I live on the east side of the street and have a lovely telephone pole at the end of my driveway. Are you going to be able to just hitch onto what Gottfried has already put down there, or will you have to come in and dig up the street again?
That's really an engineering question. I couldn't answer that, and I don't think. Okay.
Whatever is undergrounded is being fed from overhead somewhere else on the island. So everything feeding that area is going to have to go underground. So there would still be impacts to any given road, even though your service or part of a line is underground.
Okay, second question. This is more general. Help us understand this 25% discount on the FPL charges. For instance, do the consumers get a 25% discount on their power bills, and when would that start? Because, I mean, then the $500 a year would more than be paid for if you got a 25% power discount.
No, this is not on your power bill, okay? FP&L is required by the state to give us a 25% discount of bringing in the new...
Construction cost.
Construction cost, exactly. And it's only if you do at least a 3-mile area, okay?
So it's not going to have any impact on our actual power bills?
No. No, this will be a special assessment on your tax bill. This will not be on your power bill.
Even though presumably the power company is going to be paying less in the future to maintain, because they won't be maintaining all these above.
Actually, what we're paying for these lines to be buried underground, all the residents are, and then they get inspected by FP&L that they think we've done a good job because we're using independent contractors, and then we give them the lines, but they maintain them for the rest of the time. Perpetuity.
Jeff, this is Zach. Will the special assessments kick in when you finally get your undergrounded service, or will those of us in Midtown start paying those even though it's going to be several years before we see any benefits on our streets?
Basically, at this time, we're talking about dividing it into 2 draws. And first group will go for 5 years, and they'll start paying right away whether they get it or not in that first group. And then the next group goes the following 5 years. And they'll start paying the first year. They may not get it till the 10th year.